Are we go?
Just 2 seconds. Yes, we're live now. Thank you.
Right. So a formal good morning to everyone for this workshop, this elected member briefing, actually. We're really pleased to have you with us, Michael. Councillors, we have, as you know, condensed a few of the sessions because there was just too much packed into one day. Having said that, between 10 and 11 is the time allocated for the living wage. We've got the naming of roads and a brief housing update, and of course this afternoon another kind of substantial topic around the election voting systems. Just to refresh you on how I intend to run this, these briefings are essentially to make sure you have much information of the right sort that you need to make the decision, but we're not making any decisions today. And I'll just remind councillors that you need to keep an open mind right until that decision-making point. You will have views, of course, but what we're doing is gathering all the evidence we need to weigh up, and we'll make the decision in a formal council meeting where the full debate will be had, and that's the time when you will have made up your mind which way you're going to go. So in the spirit of that, how I'm going to run this is to let Michael talk to his report, which we've all seen and read, and actually was fascinating reading, so thank you very much. It was also very easy to read, which I really appreciate. So we'll let you talk to the salient points, and then each councillor, I'm going to give you your 2 top questions out of equity. You know, it's hard managing on Zoom, so to give everybody fairness, think about what the 2 questions for clarity, preferably not leading political questions about the fact and the content. And then at the end of each item, I will whiz round each elected member one by one, as I have been doing, to make sure that everybody feels that they can request any extra information or say what's missing from their point of view, so that we've got our heads full of the right information before we make a decision. But I do want to say on camera, because I know people are watching this on live stream, this is not the decision-making meeting. We had a prior presentation on this topic, the living wage. This is another presentation, so that we've got a full suite of information to consider in decision-making, which is later. I know I'm labouring that point, but I don't want anyone in the general public who may be watching to be disappointed when it feels like nothing comes out of this but a lot of information. If a lot of information comes out, it's a good meeting. All right, so Michael, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Your Worship. I guess I can take my report as read. I don't have any presentation to make or any prepared comments. I know that you're all busy people, so I'm happy to open up to questions immediately.
Okay, all right, that's great. It's a fairly fulsome report. I look for the little blue hands and go that way if I can. Rob.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Michael, for the detailed report. And as Mayor Paula said, very, very easy to read. A question I've got is around your comments on page 3, paragraphs 3 and 4, where you mention the consequential financial cost to Hamilton City Council of maintaining relativity with more senior staff. When you were putting this report together, did management ask you to do any modelling as to what that consequential cost might be?
No, I wasn't asked to do any modelling at all as part of this report. Really, it was about scoping the literature, the existing research on the living wage and minimum wage and efficiency wages and related things. The costs that are noted in the report were given to me by council, so I haven't done any costing myself. The comment that I've made relates in particular to recent research of Seattle's minimum wage, where they definitely noted that not only did the minimum wage raise wages for those who were below the previous minimum wage, but also raise wages for those who were above it previously.
When we bring the report back, we intend to
hang on, I've got another
One second. Just 1 second. I'll let Rob pursue his line of questions, which he can direct to staff or Michael, but I will come to staff for the right for response to staff data.
Thank you. Is it possible, Michael, to do modelling to try and calculate what that cost might be?
It would be possible. You would have to make some assumptions about what the relativities would be going forward. But yeah, it's definitely possible to do that.
Yeah, and just as a final question to that same line of questioning, if the increase of the minimum wage to the living wage is, let's say, 6%, and I've just used that as an example. I think it's higher than that in our case. Is that percentage a fair rate to apply across the whole of the organisation payroll?
I think that's probably a question for you rather than it is a question for me as to whether it's fair or not.
No, I'm not saying is it fair. I guess I'm trying to find out what the modelling might tell us, and I guess you're pretty much used to macroeconomic modelling, and I know that there's lots of assumptions involved. But I'm just suggesting, is that a fair way? Is that a fair way to start, or is it likely to be more or less than, say, whatever the actual increase is from that minimum wage to the living wage?
That's actually a really difficult question to answer. But I mean, one assumption you could make would be the same percentage increase across the organisation, and of course that would be one way to cost it.
And that's for political direction, as you point out, Michael. One of the you might want to, because you asked about the financial modelling, I think it's fair to maybe take a response to that question from the appropriate staff member, whether it's Richard or David.
I'll pick it up. So Councillor Pascoe, really good question, and we intend to bring the information regarding relativities back to when we bring any information back to Council in the report. We probably even share it beforehand, to be fair. In terms of Michael's comments about the assumptions, he's absolutely correct. But we do have intel and information based on previous experiences in terms of moving to the council minimum wage of $20. And it's not necessarily the absolute percentage increase at the minimum, at the bottom level, that gets extrapolated across the entire council. So I would not expect, let's say, staff that are on well above the living wage to get a pay rise as a consequence. I'll suggest that the relativity adjustment, should we choose to progress with one, will diminish as it goes up through the ranks. So we can bring there's some corroborating information out there, and I think Seattle actually did say that it wasn't actually just a broad percentage increase across everything. There was an inflationary impact, Michael, and I think that was at different percentages across different levels. But we will bring that information back to you, Councillor Rob.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Helpful. Next on the list, I have Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. My question is, what does the research say that the impacts of increasing a living wage has on small to medium businesses?
Sorry, just to clarify, are you asking about what it would say if council was to move to a living wage, or whether the small businesses themselves were to move to a living wage?
Well, small businesses themselves. I know we're talking in a council context, but we're also looking at potential contractors. As went out with our procurement policy, I understand. So only doing business with other businesses that adopt a living wage. So there will be a whole raft and a whole range of organisations and businesses that we deal with, from very large ones to, in some ways, sometimes quite small. So I'd like to understand, well, what does the living wage impact? I can understand what it's going to do for a big business, but the small to medium, given that those are the biggest representation of businesses in New Zealand.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, a lot of the comments that I've made in the brief apply also to small and medium businesses as well. So paying a living wage, you would expect to have lower absenteeism, higher productivity, better workers applying for the jobs at those businesses, and so on. So I think those sorts of comments still apply. Of course, it means higher costs for those businesses, and they would have to pass those costs on, not just to council, but presumably to anyone else that they are contracting for as well.
Thank you. If I could just probe a little bit deeper with this line of questioning, and the reason I'm posing the question is because I did hear it was on the news, and given it's only one business owner, but she was a New Zealand clothing manufacturer and decided that she wanted to maintain her business here in New Zealand, and there were consequences for that, higher wages, etc., etc. And one of the things she did mention was that I try really hard to keep New Zealanders employed in the whole from start to finish, and increasing wages. If I go to living wages, it means I'm going to have to go offshore because she just won't be able to make the business work for her.
So the question around that is, or you just...
The question around that is, what sort of research has been done around actually talking to or communicating with small to medium businesses? I see it's kind of qualitative stuff here, lower absenteeism, better workers. I can't remember some of the other things you said, but what's some of the bottom line stuff? Higher costs, yes, and that's going to get passed on to consumers. But what are some other consequences?
That's a good question. I think it really comes back to the things that I've already said. So it is higher cost. It is going to be passed on, but there are positive aspects to it as well. I think one of the things that we should recognise, though, is that these small businesses, in the main, aren't paying wages that are higher than the living wage. So right now, they probably think that it's not worthwhile to do so on net.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I missed it.
Yeah. So on the whole, a lot of these small and medium businesses are not paying the living wage. Some are, but many are not. Those that are not, you've got to take away from that right now they think that having balanced it up, that it's not worthwhile for them to do so.
Okay.
But that's neither an argument here or there as to whether it's good for council, I don't think.
Very good, thank you, that's all.
Thank you. I've got Sarah. Sarah.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. Thanks, Michael, for your report. This question is probably more for David and or Richard. I was just wanting to clarify the scope of the report that's going to be coming to us. Is it just for direct council employees or for employers as well as contractors? And then the second part of that is, if it is for contractors as well, how does that work logistically in terms of, those contractors in many other aspects of their job may not be being paid the living wage, but we are paying them for the work they're doing for council. So just how does that work there?
I'll let you take that one, David.
So the proposal that we put through as part of the annual plan doesn't address relativity, but the report's been written and it's been circulated, so we can come back based on Richard's correct on his assumptions around modelling. We can have a look at relativity. In terms of contractors, we would need to contact. We could make an assessment, but to get the total number, we would need to make contact with our key contracts that we thought would have employees under that would fit this particular scenario, and just to get some more accurate costings. In terms of that, we would also need to be cautious in terms of ensuring that they understood that no decision's been made, it's a council decision, and that if a decision did go down that route, there would be an expectation that they would be passing on that higher rate to their employees.
Okay, so, oh, sorry, just to clarify, David, so right now the report is just focusing on direct
Staff.
employers, on staff. Okay, so there would need to be additional work done to find out how it would apply in terms
Additional work's underway, isn't it, David?
That's right. Additional work has started. We're bringing a report back on the council minimum wage that you'll understand is currently set at $20, and that there's a report coming to the next council meeting that gives a pretty good estimation of what we think it would cost if we were to extend the council minimum wage out to contractors. So that will come in the May council meeting. So that piece of work has been done for the $20 number.
Yeah, and so just as an
example,
example, sorry, you go, Richard.
I was going to answer one of the questions that David didn't quite get to, was your question about the logistics of the organisations being able to pay the living wage. So what we found when we went out for the cleaning and the security contracts, both, and we went for the tender process, I think it was the security one, they're all in a position where they could separate their costs out and pay staff at different rates per different jobs. So whilst not all organisations would do that, most of them have a time cost billing system, and they should be able to cater for those requirements. So it is a possibility. However, I suggest that maybe smaller, less sophisticated clients may well have to review their systems, but at this point, I don't think it's going to be hugely onerous.
That's correct.
For them.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not a case of them needing to be fully accredited or anything. It's just working with those particular contractors at this stage that are associated with council work.
And we'd have to work out whether or not we choose to audit that or not, but we rely on the contracts and the contract we entered into, contract enforcement, to ensure they're doing their responsibilities.
Okay, thank you. That all makes sense.
Thank you, Sarah. I think I have Ryan next.
Thanks, Paula. I don't want to repeat Sarah's question, but so apologies if I missed the nuance in her one, but what's the threshold to be accredited? Does it have to include subcontractors or not?
I'll take that. So the expectation is that it does include contractors.
Okay, I couldn't see any intel in terms of how many accredited employers there are across New Zealand.
So the Living Wage Movement website has a list of the accredited employers on it. From what I could see, there's only a handful of councils, and I couldn't tell you exactly how many there are, but there's certainly dozens of employers listed on the website. Okay,
and the Living Wage Aotearoa movement, what's their sort of structure? Have they got a governance set up, or what's the sort of the authority or credibility that they have?
I couldn't answer that question. Sorry, I don't know what their governance setup is.
Okay, so let's flag that as an unanswered question, Ryan, and see what we can find out on that one.
Yeah, that's all for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Actually, that raised a question in line with mine, so I just might jump in and take one if I could. You were talking about in one of your paragraphs adopting a living wage potentially. Sorry, I'm looking at the screen here. Locks the employer into a situation where wages become set by an external organisation, the Living Wage Aotearoa movement, and do not necessarily reflect commercial or local realities. How much of a problem is that in your view? Are you suggesting that we're bound, if we become accredited, we're bound to follow the directive of that organisation forward, regardless of what's happening in Hamilton or with our local businesses?
I believe that's the case. Once you become an accredited employer, you are essentially agreeing to follow the living wage as and when it's updated by Living Wage Aotearoa, which means that you have less scope for making your own decisions in that space. You could always choose later to not be an accredited employer anymore. Of course, as I've highlighted in the report, that comes with a certain reputational risk as well.
So understanding, from my point of view, looking for information going forward, understanding the answer to Ryan's question would be helpful, and also how the living wage Aotearoa movement derives their information, because it would cascade out of how they derive their information would then shape what they would be asking accredited businesses to do. So just, do you know anything about that, how they operate behind and where they get their information from?
So you mean in terms of how they calculate the living wage itself?
Yeah.
So I've briefly summarised that at the start of the brief. There's a lot more information, of course, that they have made available as to how they make those calculations. I would say it's reasonably transparent how they do so.
Yeah.
So it's replicable. You can use similar data to get similar results to what they do. They do a full recalculation, I believe, off the top of my head, every 4 years. And then in between those times, they are pegging the living wage to the average wage changes.
Okay, and last thing on that is I don't know that we'll know, because they came and spoke to us previously, what the result of this financial economic crisis that we're in looks like in respect to how those will be set going forward. I'd be interested in that, where some businesses are unfortunately cutting wages, which is just a sad consequence of the financial times we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I suppose it's too early to make an assessment on what that's going to mean for the living wage.
So another 6 months might be quite telling in that respect, in terms of getting people back into business or not. And of course, some people are losing jobs, aren't they? So just interesting, that's all, because what we're talking about now is in today's times, exceptional circumstances. I have Jeff, then Martin, and then you. Did I have Ewan? No.
Thanks, Paula. Michael, thanks for the report. We've adopted a minimum wage for the council staff, as you know, and your report sort of refers to the fact that the minimum wage and the living wage are sort of comparable. In fact, they both have risen. In fact, the minimum wage has risen faster than the living wage since that's been around. Wouldn't it just be easier just to stick to the minimum wage for your staff and just avoid all the obligations and complexities of the living wage?
It's certainly an argument for that, or there are alternatives, of course, which is pegging to a higher minimum wage than the statutory one, or adopting a wage that follows the average wage rather than the living wage. So there's a lot of options available other than just adopting the statutory minimum wage.
Well, yeah, but we've adopted one higher than the statutory one.
Yes, and the question would be how you would adjust that over time. So you could adjust that in line with changes to the statutory minimum wage. You could adjust it in line with the average wage, or you could follow the living wage, or indeed there's many other options that you could choose.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, so okay. Do you have sort of any view on the ethics of using ratepayers' money to pay contractors more than you need to for a service, so they can pay their staff what you think they should be paying them?
Oh, that's a very loaded question, but I'm not sure it's fair to put. Sorry, I can't hear you.
I would never ask.
You never ask a loaded question. I don't think it's very fair to lay ethics at the feet of Michael at this time. And that's something that we as council will need to consider.
Okay, so all right, last question then. So perhaps summarising how I see the report, would you agree it's good to do if you can afford it?
That's certainly one way that you could interpret things, yes.
Yeah.
So affordability is a factor of consideration, yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. You done, Jeff? Kapai, thank you. Martin.
Yes, I suppose, would it be appropriate for a local authority to have a contract with any company that was classified as a bad employer?
I guess that's really a question for yourselves as council rather than it is a question for me.
Thank you, Michael. Second question, and then I'll go to Richard. Just internationally, is it true, I think, that Boris Johnson, when he was Mayor of London, and the Greater London Council, in principle, okay, it's slightly different in the UK, were wishing to support the living wage?
I'm not aware of that particular example. Of course, the living wage movement arose first in the UK, and that, I believe that was at the time that Boris Johnson was mayor.
Could you or someone just come back and confirm that, please? Because the question is that from a philosophical point of view in the UK, at a local government level, the particular issues spanned any political, traditional political left or right spectrum, as I understand it. The next question is to Richard, and this is just historical, and I apologise, I arrived slightly late to the workshop, but historically in the last term, and this is very much for the benefit of returning and new councillors and ourselves and myself, you brought a report, Richard, to council, which at the time was supported by the then mayor. And this was to do with an immediate implementation of a minimum wage, I think. There was then an amendment, I think Paula and Jeff moved it, I think, that we went to a 3-year transition, some sort of 3-year transition. Richard, could you just clarify that? Because I think that is part of the background art, and I totally accept that the term minimum wage is different to the living wage in the sense of the obligation facts. But Richard, could you give us a quick reminder of that process? Because what I would like to see is the minutes and that report, albeit, just circulated as well. Just give us, I'm just trying to get a contextual.
Yeah, absolutely happy for that. I can't actually remember seconding that.
Richard there? No, sorry, and I don't, trust me, I don't want to, say it's wrong.
David, can you answer that?
Yeah, Richard?
Yeah. I think that's information we can usefully get.
With respect, I just want to quickly just make sure that my memory is correct, purely because I know what we're going to be talking about is the notion of what Richard was proposing as a minimum wage. And it's very important that we have that historic context, not necessarily there was an amendment or resolution or whatever. Richard, where are we at?
No, look, with all due respect, I hear what you're saying, Martin, and I will get that information. We have Michael with us today to talk about his report. You can raise requests for additional information, and that will definitely be provided. I don't think we need to do that on the run today. I think we need to focus on where we're at. So I'll take another question if you have one.
The question to you, Madam Chair, is simply this, that we already have a history. The big discussion is going to be adopting a minimum wage, which is the equivalent of a living wage, and not be tied necessarily, our actions speak louder than our words, so to speak. I guess through Madam Chair, Richard, when could you circulate that extra information, just so that we've got the context? And I realise,
David, you can pick that up. Yes.
That our own chief executive introduced to the council a particular proposal, which we have under current amendment. We need to know this. My understanding is we're roughly on a 3-year journey to that proposal.
I'm happy to pick that up.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, Councillor Martin. We'll get it out pretty quickly.
Thank you. That's my point. We'll not try to not get you the answer to your question. Just not on the hoof. Let's bring it all together. Sorry, I've muted you. I mute you. Sorry, go.
With respect, we can talk all about living wage, and it's very valid. It's really crucial that we ourselves understand by resolution of the Democratic Council of the journey we are currently on.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm afraid, Martin, you missed the introduction in which I said this is a briefing just to clarify what information we need and to ask Michael questions about his report. Decision making comes quite well, not quite a bit later, a bit later, and we'll have everything to hand for that. Thank you. I've got, who have I got next? Sorry, I'll just get back to participants. I've got Maxine, sorry, apologies.
Thanks, Mayor Paula, and to Michael, thank you for your fulsome report. I note that it was that you were asked in March to present and look at all that research. And I wonder now that we're quite a long way into our COVID lockdown and level 3, moving perhaps to 2, how might the fallout of that affect this debate? And I'm thinking particularly in our relationship with our higher paid employees who have taken pay cuts and been quite public about that, and also about the public's perception about our very highest paid employees, particularly in relationship to some of the most essential workers who are earning the lowest of wages. And, you know, we're talking here about less than $20 an hour. And what that relationship might have in regard to the argument for bringing in a living wage.
Sorry, just pause 1 second. Becca, could you just have a look in the waiting room? I don't recognise all the names, but there's some people in the waiting room. Could you please have a look at that? Sorry, Maxine, off you go. Or who was the question directed at? Michael?
To Michael, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So I don't believe that the current situation would change my report in any meaningful way. The research is still pretty clear. The question of people's perception of higher paid employees, I'm not sure how that particularly has any bearing on the living wage per se, because I think that it relates much more to people's perceptions of the lowest earning employees rather than the highest earning ones.
Okay, so in terms of that, we use an authority or advice of an authority to set the wages of our highest paid employees, yet there's nothing that or no regulatory or advisory group apart from the living wage organisation that does any kind of work or comparison for the lowest paid workers in New Zealand. Are you aware of any other organisation or measure that we might be able to go to for further advice or guidance around our lowest paid workers?
Not in this context. I'm not aware of another organisation doing the same thing or similar things to what the living wage movement is doing. Of course, there are many advocacy organisations that would advocate for higher wages for the lowest paid, but I don't believe that there's any that are doing it in the same systematic way that the living wage movement is.
Well, apart from the union movement, I guess. Hey, yeah. Would you consider that there would be a way for council to redistribute wages rather than it becoming an additional cost to council? So I'm thinking about wage caps on certain roles in order to be able to bring the lowest level up.
Yeah, as I highlighted in the brief, of course, the higher adopting the living wage does come with cost, and that cost would have to be met in some way. One of the ways that you could meet it is as you say, lowering the wages or salaries at the top.
I guess I wouldn't want to signal that I would lower them, but certainly capping could be an option, do you think?
Yeah, possibly. Without thinking through the modelling of that, I couldn't say for certain whether that would fully offset the cost.
Thank you. And look, last tiny little question, I guess this is to either David or Richard. If we're talking about $230,000 for the cost of providing that to council employees, what might that represent as a percentage of both, I guess, the total wage cost and the total council spend? Is that something that we could have reported back to us in the future, or do you know that now?
We could circulate that back to you.
Okay, let's put that on the list of questions to also bring back. We don't necessarily, we've got Michael here and the focus is here. It's a good question, Max. We should get an answer to it, absolutely. But let's pursue the questioning of Michael. Happy for councillors, by the way, to direct staff a question for more information, because that's what this session's about. What more do we need to know? So a very good question, Maxine, and yes, let's get the answer. You finished? I think I've got Dave now.
Thanks, Paula. Michael, is there any evidence, measurements done on the productivity uplift you might get, if any, from lower paid workers receiving increased wages? I know there's a discussion of it, but looking at evidence there.
I wasn't able to find anything that was specific enough to New Zealand that I felt comfortable including it. You're right that there's a lot of discussion of this, and it has a lot of theoretical backing, and it has a lot of anecdotal evidence. But in terms of the, I guess, quantitative evidence, I didn't find anything within my short search.
What would you expect, looking generally at those arguments, which are also raised whenever the minimum wage, for instance, is increased?
Yeah, I think when an individual employer raises wages, then you can expect that that their employees will work a little bit harder. You could make that argument in a couple of ways. You could make it on a threat-based approach, where if they're not working harder, then they may lose their jobs and have to go somewhere else and work a little bit less. Or you could think about the employment relationship as being like a gift exchange. I think George Akerlof makes this point. And if you pay people a little bit more, they feel inclined to work a little bit harder for you. So that's essentially what the theory tells us. There is evidence to suggest that's the case. Quantitatively, exactly how much productivity gain would there be? I'm not sure that I can answer that question with any certainty.
Okay, thanks. My other question relates to a paragraph you've got on the third page of your report, where you're talking about the financial effect of giving the living wage to contractors, and you say it's not clear whether that's to be covered in that. I'm just wondering how deep you looked at this in terms of HCC, given that we have already got a policy, an active policy in place of paying the contractors in the two major areas where wages are in this sort of low threshold category, cleaners and security guards. So there are very few ones that aren't already covered there. So there wouldn't be much new financial effect. That's already happened.
That wasn't within my brief, Councillor, but I would note that looking at the living wage accredited employee, the rules around that, it requires you to immediately move all your directly employed staff to the living wage, and then to have a process that moves all of the staff of your contractors onto the living wage as well. So that, I believe that means that the change to contractors wouldn't have to be immediate, but there would have to be some agreed transition.
But of course, that's if you sign up to the particular accord or whatever it's called. Yes. There are organisations are there not, commercial and otherwise, in New Zealand that pay the living wage to, under various sort of mechanisms that are not directly doing that. The warehouse required training first, for instance, things like that. So you don't have to be accredited in order to pay the living wage.
No, you don't have to be accredited, and it's worth noting that I believe off the top of my head, Auckland and Tauranga councils are both paying living wages without being accredited employers.
It's the rest of the Golden Triangle. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Now note that I was going to give everyone their top couple of questions, so I'm reluctant to go around the board and around the board and around the board. So I'm going to invite anyone who hasn't asked a question who might have one, including Norm, who's with us now, to raise a question if they want one. And other than that, I'll take a quick round the hands that have gone back up, a quick one question that you feel hasn't been answered or you can't derive from the information. Hey, Norm, do you have any questions? No, okay. You no questions?
I just wanted to, and it may be a silly question, am I correct in saying the living wage is a matrix of calculations nationally, i.e. somebody who is on a living wage in Auckland is on exactly the same living wage in Hamilton?
Yeah, the living wage as calculated now is a national living wage and doesn't differ by region.
Can I ask you a technical question? Would it not be more appropriate for Hamilton to engage experts to do a Hamilton living wage, keeping in mind clearly our cost of living and our house affordability, which is one of our great redeeming features of the Great Waikato, is better than Auckland?
It's definitely possible to do that. It's not clear to me that there would be a great advantage in doing so. I mean, when you look at the cost of living for Hamilton versus the nation as a whole, it's not clear to me that it's Hamilton seriously different from that average. In the report, I gave you a rough and ready estimation of that based on the median house price and the median rent. Suggests to me at least that there wouldn't be a great deal to be gained from calculating a specific living wage for Hamilton separate.
Could you remind me of the exact quantum differential? Because I see the living wage is being suggested to go up to $22.20, I think, later this year.
So if I just draw your attention to the very last page of the report, the last paragraph before the conclusion, I note there that the median house price for Hamilton is $622,000. For New Zealand as a whole, $722,000, and the difference in rents, Hamilton $450 a week, and New Zealand as a whole $470. Now, most people who would be on the living wage or wages below that possibly get accommodation supplements from the government as well, and so that would offset some of that difference in cost of living as well, because they get a little.
Right. But you don't actually extrapolate that out to a different hourly wage, because from your conclusion, I don't quite understand the weighting given to house price median in the overall context of setting the living wage.
No, I took that as I took that as being a proxy indicator of the difference in cost of living, without going through an entire calculation of what all of the cost of living would be for Hamilton versus the rest of the
country. But wouldn't it just, if we are truly motivated, if we are truly motivated at trying to land on a realistic living wage, maybe it would be helpful, and maybe this is an option for council, to actually pull on the amazing resources we have here in the Waikato at the university and others to actually drill down further and actually get that scientifically determined.
Right, so that's a good point raised. It's a question you've raised. So let's put that in that potentially we could seek some additional information around that. I think it was a good question to raise. I think Michael has answered it as best he can here and now. So, okay, so everyone's popping their hand up for a second time. I'm going to quickly whiz around. You've got one question without long preamble, or not everyone else will have time. So I'll start with Ryan. No, it's no good. I'll start very quickly with Jeff.
Thank you, Paula. Michael, we've in terms of economic benefit, which was raised by David McPherson, I just want to follow that up. We've done a lot of work in terms of trying to help the region's economic benefit, with the stimulus package that we're trying to do, etc., to get money back in there. So in terms of this, if moving to a living wage meant we might lose some jobs, I'm not saying it will, but what would be the bigger benefit? Moving to a living wage and losing some jobs, or keeping people in jobs and sticking at moving to a living wage and losing some jobs, or sticking to the minimum wage and keeping people in work at the council?
Yeah, as I noted in the brief, the actual economic impact of moving to a living wage is probably very, very small in terms of the in comparison to GDP of Hamilton City as a whole. It's a fraction of a percent. It's not even a rounding error, and so even if you considered the impacts on employment or unemployment, it's still going to be very small. I think that there's a very weak economic impact argument for the living wage. It's much better, much more robust or credible arguments for the living wage than economic impact.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Maxine.
Thank you, and thanks for indulging me once more. Look, I'm interested just in your comments around the benefits for council in terms of the moral argument. Council's not just another business in town. We're an enormous employer and hold a lot of responsibility for spend of taxpayers' money. And so
get to the question, Max.
Yeah, so my question really is about that the higher moral obligation that we have, and that there's some benefit for that in a political view too, I think, in terms of our public. So can you just expand a little bit further about what that benefit for us might be?
I think it's unreasonable to lay down ethical and moral arguments on Michael, but he might want to talk, at least since he's touched on perception in his report, he may want to comment that. Maxine, that is a good question to answer in debate. We're not in debate, we're just asking Michael to clarify his position. Did you want to comment, Michael?
Yeah, it's definitely a question for you more so than a question for me. I mean, towards the end of my brief, I did raise the idea of the moral philosophy argument in favour of the living wage, that it's about fairness, but really that's not a question that I can answer directly as to what is fair or what is unfair. I mean, that's what you guys get paid to do.
Thank you. Cheers.
It was a good try, though. It was a good try.
I think, though, that the impact of
hang on, Max. I've just muted you, Max. But just because I don't want to get into debate, I've got 3 more questions, and then I am going to do the around the room 1 minute comment for each, everybody. Sarah.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. Michael, I was just wanting to dig a little further into that questioning around attaching, say, if we don't go for the accredited living wage, but we go for something which is, currently the same or similar, and then we want to look at how that then changes over the years and what we attach it to. Can you just expand a bit further on, the pros and cons to attaching it to, say, the average wage versus something else?
I think it just, if you were to choose one option or another, it just changes the path a little bit over time. I think you'll see from the graph that I included in my brief that they're all moving up they're moving up at different rates. The fact that the statutory minimum wage has increased by the most over that period basically reflects the government that we have in at the moment and their views about the minimum wage and how it should have been increased. Whether that would continue to increase faster than the other measures seems unlikely. The average wage is tracking upwards. The living wage is tracking upwards. I don't know that there's a strong argument for one or other or any of these over any of the others. Sorry, that doesn't really answer your question in the way that you'd hoped, I guess. But to me, there's not a strong argument to choose one of these over any others, or choose pegging to one of these over any other.
Yeah, although I suppose with the minimum wage, it's gone up faster because it had a lower starting point compared to the living wage to begin with.
It did.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. We've got Dave, and then I've got Martin and Rob, and then we are going to finish the questions. So to the question, not to a preamble. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Michael and Paula. In terms of Ewan's question relating to whether there should be a sort of a Hamilton living wage calculated, can you confirm or correct me if I'm wrong that the current living wage figures that we see and that you've published here calculate on some sort of national average, so they're not Auckland's or Invercargill's, they're somewhere in between anyway?
Yeah, they're based on national level data, so they do. So there is some averaging across Auckland and Invercargill and everywhere else.
In terms of living costs, and including that, I think you started to mention a bit of housing before, we would be relatively close to the middle, would we?
That's my belief, and as some evidence of that, that's what I was using the housing costs and the rental costs as some evidence that we're close to the average anyway.
Okay, Dave, thanks. Good questions. We're going to have to buzz through. Margaret's joined us for a question now. I've got next Martin. One question, please.
Can you confirm that it is the role of social scientists to look at moral and ethical questions involving a fair go for working people?
You don't have to answer that, Michael. Again, a loaded question, as he knows from his smiling. It is certainly our job to look at the moral and ethical question. But if we want, I've unmuted you. Sorry, I've got the power of the mute button.
It's a genuine question.
It's not one I'm going to ask Michael to answer. Having said that, we are leaving him with some questions we might come back to him and ask for more work on. So, Rob, and then Margaret.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. Look, I'm trying to get evidence here that would support one way or the other rather than make political statements. And given that there's a lack of evidence, Michael, that you said around productivity increases, is there evidence in other reports that might support us moving to a higher wage at those levels based on us seeking increased productivity increases? And here I'm using examples like education and experience that might justify, not only from a moral point of view, but also from a productivity point of view, how we could move those lower wages to somewhere near that living wage.
There's definitely anecdotal evidence. There's definitely qualitative research that supports those arguments. As I said earlier, though, whether I could pin an actual quantitative number down as to the productivity gain, I'm not sure that I could with any confidence.
Okay.
But you could access that information for us if our management decided that that was useful to have in the reports that are coming back to us.
I'm sorry, which information are you referring to?
You'll be able to access this evidence that might support, justification for wage increases based on, say, experience and education, and any other factors that might help.
The qualitative evidence that is available, I have access to it, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Margaret, lucky last question.
Thank you. Oh, crikey, now I've forgotten it.
Sorry.
I want to know, what's our government's position on the living wage? I've just done a little bit of searching and seen that the minimum wage has gone up on the 1st of April, but I have no sense of where are we being led nationally on this. Do you know?
I don't know what the government's position on the living wage is, sorry.
Okay. Is there any way we can find that out?
Yes, I think we could do a little looking into that. David is nodding, so that is a good sign. Okay, thank you. Look, everyone, we've had a really good round questions. I noticed Tapora has been able to join us. I would indulge her for a question if you have one, Tapora, but if you don't, all right, kapai. So we've had in fact, those questions have been really useful. We've had 2 sessions now of information on the living wage from external parties and other discussions. As I said at the beginning, this is not for decision making. This is so that we can have the best information that we can to make a decision, because I think we all agree that fairness, as the report talks about fairness is the most important factor. So in that respect, I'm going to go around all councillors. You have only 1 minute, so 1 minute to ask, to clarify information that you need, or make or identify a gap or something that staff might be able to address, or we might be able to address through Michael going forward. We're not debating it now. We are just information gathering and being well informed. So I'm just going to start down a random list like I do, councillors, so that everyone gets a fair say, starting with Ewan.
Look, thank you. I found today interesting. I would really like to drill further down on a Hamilton-specific living wage calculation. I totally respect, Michael, your views and thoughts on that. But I think it would be particularly insightful, and it may just prove you're absolutely right, that there is no difference. But I think it's worth thrashing that out more, and I think we've got capable people at the university and elsewhere who could help us. My other point is, I love the idea of exploring a more flexible model rather than just living wage Aotearoa, because I'm concerned about the how many increases there are. And I guess going back to my first point, those increases nationally probably are reflective of national trends. I'd be interested in a mechanism that reflect Waikato trends and Hamilton trends. And so I'd like to dig deeper there.
Okay, thank you very much, Ewan. That was very straightforward. Next on the list is, well, I won't put Tapora up next on the list, although she is. We'll go with Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Thanks, Paula. It's a question for Richard Briggs, which may or may not be possible to answer. I'm concerned about the loss of revenue that this council's already lost through COVID and will continue to lose, and I guess the impact that it has on staffing. And I'm curious to know, and this is not a mischievous thing, I really would like to know what impact moving to a living wage across all staff and all contractors could have on job losses.
I can't answer that directly. I'll have to put a bit of effort into that. David alluded to before about doing some modelling on relativities and the contract side of things as well. Once we have those information, and then it really comes down to the elected members' appetite for balancing the books and how long you want to balance before you balance the books again. So there's a whole lot of dynamics for me to put in front of you guys, but giving you the absolute numbers will probably be the first step. So let us work on that, and that's underway.
Sorry, Richard, but this is just us collecting and not answering. So apologies.
Thanks, Richard.
Yeah. So yeah, we're gathering up the points and requests of all elected members. We're out of questions now. It's not quite debate. It's more of a roundup. Thanks, Jeff. Have you got anything else? No, all good. Dave. Fine. You're fine. Okay, Martin. Martin?
No, fine. And I asked just the background information that as per what the current resolution report, we are on at the moment, we're on a certain journey initiated by the previous council as a result of that amendment or a substantive motion moved by the mayor and the previous mayor and also Richard. So just interested in following that up. So we've got historical context, and of course it's not lost on me since the COVID emergency how critical the people are who clean our toilets and collect our rubbish have become. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Maxine.
Hi, I'm really interested in the quantum and the percentage that we're talking about, because from my quick look over, when we look at our total expenses, this is minuscule, but it sends a really much clearer signal about how we value the lowest paid and potentially the most valuable workers that we have in council. So getting that overview is really helpful for me, but also having some level of understanding about the impact of increasing to a living wage, and is there any evidence at all that suggests that it could create job losses?
Okay, thank you. That's a good point we can delve into. Margaret.
So more information, I think that's what we've been asked.
Yeah.
I would like to know about the national government's position, well, not the current government's position, I should say, because if there are moves afoot to have the living wage compulsory, then I think that's going to save us a whole lot of humming and hawing and hand-wringing, and we just do what we need to do. So that would be helpful to know whereabouts in the timeline that is. And secondly, I'm really interested to know more from the horse's mouth, actually, from small to medium businesses around what would be the impact for them for introducing a living wage. And therefore, I would like to either hear from our Waikato Chamber of Commerce or from our Central Business Association. So rather than an overarching kind of report, I want to hear from those people. And this is from the contractors' point of view.
Thank you, very clear. Mangai Norm, Morena.
Yep, kia ora, nothing from me, Mia Paula.
Thank you. Mark.
Thanks, Paula. No, this has been, thank you, Michael. This has been really interesting. And the more I learn about it, the more I've got to think about it. So no, I'm listening and taking it in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ryan.
No, nothing further. Thanks, Paula, at this time.
Okay. Te Pora, any comments, questions? No, thanks. No.
I was just unmuting. It's the speed at which you can unmute. So, Mia Paula. It was just around the considerations of equity for Māori in the living wage, considering that 23% of the population. No, that's in the region. We've got the largest Māori population. In this city, we have an even mix between those that are from here and therefore get some support from iwi, and those that are not from here who rely on other measures of support. So equity within where they come from, and equity again around how that is across the board.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Sarah, have I? Yep, no, Sarah's next. Thanks.
Thank you. So just a few points I'd be keen to have further information on is around auditing. So to what extent would we need to, if we are looking at contractors as well, to what extent we would want to be doing some kind of audits or checks to ensure that they are passing on the increased amount to those workers. More information around extending this to contractors, so that that option is there on the table. And Michael's report touched on not just the moral argument, but I think there was something around employee perception of their job satisfaction and that kind of thing. And there was a marked difference between lower paid and higher paid employees around that. So some more information on that would be really helpful. And finally, I guess I understand we're looking at the option of a minimum wage and a living wage. So in terms of the minimum wage, just keen to understand those options around what we would peg it to or how we would review it as a council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think have I left anyone off? No, I don't think so.
Mayor Paula, can I quickly jump in?
Who can't see? Who's this?
Sorry, it's Kesh.
Oh, hi, Kesh. Sorry. Yes, you may.
Sorry, I missed a part of the conversation, but just a couple of things which I'm not sure if we've touched on. But coming back for me personally would be affordability. So if we do go ahead, then where's the funding coming from? Are we borrowing or is it within our current budgets? And the second thing would be talking about the flow-on effects. So if we are increasing to living wage, what about the people or the employees who are currently on that level of pay? Would there be a flow-on effect for them to be increased? Because that would be the perception. And if they're not increased, then what is the risk of that? Would they feel undervalued? Would their pay be reviewed, or what the plan going forward is? That's it. Thank you.
Paula, you haven't asked me.
Oh, I haven't asked you. Sorry, Rob. Apologies.
Look, I've just done a quick calculation on the new living wage, which is $22.10, and that's about an 11 to 12% increase on the minimum wage. So I'd like to see in the report what impact that increase has on our $70 million payroll budget that we currently have. What I sense is happening here is that there's two camps emerging. One that's keen to look at the economic benefits to justify the increased spend of ratepayers' money, and the second are the moral benefits. And I'm hopeful in the report that staff bring back, somehow we can kind of merge those two camps together a little so that we can see the benefits on both rather than just the one-sided approach that perhaps a number of us might already be considering.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those. Look, I think the debate has been awesome. We came into this today because this was about making sure that we had all the information that we need to make a fair decision for everyone, ratepayers, employees, and everyone else. From this, we've discovered that there are some gaps in our knowledge and our understanding. So in itself, that is a very useful exercise. So I want to thank you for all your on-point questions, councillors. And we will get into the substance of those questions and come back and have another discussion on this before we get to any decision-making point. So thanks, everyone. I know that everyone's motivated by the same principle of fairness, and that's where we're trying to land. So thank you. We will just take a 2-minute, 3-minute stretch of legs between topics. Yeah, just a 2 minutes, and then we'll be straight into the road naming report. Okay, thanks. Are we going to tune back in?
Yes, just confirming with Liam, just a second.
Thank you. Let me know when we're good.
Yep, we're good to go.
Thank you. So welcome back, everyone. And welcome to Sandra. And is Grant with you, or is it just you today, Sandra, who's going to present this? Sorry, you're
Grant might pop in. I'm not sure if he's here yet or not, but it's mostly me.
I am. Okay. So, councillors, again, we've had this pre-circulated. So I'll get Sandra to talk about a sort of a high-level summary of the most important things for consideration, and then we'll go through the round of questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm hoping you can see the screen there. I've just got just a very quick couple of slides just to go through. That's great. So just, you've read the information. Just to remind you of that, we have reviewed the policy, and there's just a few things we're proposing to change. That the road naming engagement with iwi occur earlier in the process. Iwi particularly to have an earlier and longer opportunity to consider names. An increase in the number of suggested names that the developer puts forward to council for selection. And at least one of those names to be in te reo from those put forward by iwi. And to go along with that, there are changes to our decision-making processes within council, and a proposed council intent of 50% of named and renamed public roads across the city to be in te reo Māori. Today we're just here because we would like to get your feedback and guidance on what you would like to see in the report, what you think of our proposals, whether there are any known views of the community, and how you would like the engagement to be managed.
Okay, thank you very much. And councillors, again, just to point out, this isn't a decision-making moment for council. It's a first access to the information since we globally talked about policy and street naming, with clarity of what you need to know for when we do make the decision, and how well you understand this matter. So I'm going to take questions as per blue hand. Hang on a minute, let me just put the right tab up so I can see who's asking. Okay, thank you. So first question, Margaret.
Thank you very much. I hadn't put my hand down from last time, that's fine. Why has this policy come to us for proposed changes now?
In the policy, we have a policy review cycle where every policy is reviewed every 3 years. So this one just came up for its regular 3-yearly review.
Okay, thank you. I thought I read somewhere that was due in 2023, but that's fine. Why 12 weeks for iwi input?
Early in the process, I went and had a conversation with Thork, the iwi representatives, and at the current policy, they are only given 10 days to consider what names should be put forward. And there's a large number of people for them to go out and talk with. And so they suggested that the 12-week period allows them enough time to organise a hui if they need, to get to all the people they need to talk to and to consider their input.
Thank you. Does this affect any other part of the process, because that's a huge shift? I understand, but it's a big shift from 10 days to 12 weeks. Does it affect the process in any way?
Yeah, so a key part of this is that Thork indicated that not only were they concerned about the length of time they had, but that they weren't being engaged until really late in the process, because with the current policy, they're asked about a specific road. So what should we name this road? Now, in the consenting process, that's really when the consent is ready to be issued. It's kind of really late. And so the developer wants to get going. What iwi indicated they would prefer is if they were consulted way back, before the development even was getting into the consent process, and for them to be able to provide a range of names that could be used not only for roads, but maybe even for pocket parks or even for the name of the whole development. So what we've done is we've taken the process from late in the process, naming a specific road and only getting 10 days, to them being consulted really early with a longer amount of time, and they provide like a pool, a register of names, not for specific roads, but that can be used anywhere.
Thank you. Is there any cost to the developer for this?
No more than there currently is.
And is there any compulsion for any adoption of those names, te reo names?
So at the moment, the developer can put forward up to 2 names for each road, and then council's internal processes select from those. What we're saying now is the developer must put forward up to 3 names, of which at least one must come from the register of names provided by iwi. And then
no compulsion.
No compulsion. Well, it is. They are compelled to put forward 1 name. At least 1 name, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And that goes not only street names, but like you said, parks, developments.
No, it's only the road names that this policy applies to, but the developer may choose to use the names for other purposes.
Thank you. I see that we're looking to increase the number of te reo names up to 50%. What is it currently?
Staff have told me that that's actually what they tend to be around now anyway. So it's actually sort of not, they're not seeing that as a big increase in what they're doing. So
okay, thank you. One more, and then I need to move around if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for putting up with my number of questions. What I'm just curious with the public road framework or flow chart, etc., that the elected members have the right to moot a road change. Is that the current situation?
Yes, in the current policy, depending on the reason for why a road is being renamed or named, there are certain situations where councillors make the decision on the road name, and there are other situations where the general manager is the one who makes the selection.
Yes, understand that. That's more about the decision-making part, but I'm talking about a suggestion or starting the process to change a name or a public road. So is that currently the system?
Yes, the current system is that councillors can propose a change in road name.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Just need to go back. I've got the slide. Can I get rid of the flow chart, please? Thank you. Actually, if we can get rid of the presentation so I can have the full screen up and look at councillors for a minute, that would be perfect. Thank you. Just hard to navigate with the little blue hands, I have to say. Okay, so I've got Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Paula. Thanks, Sandra. Does the revised policy deal with the restrictions that we identified during the last term about the number of letters that we can use in a street name? If you recall, we had some issues around proposed changes to Ward Street to another name.
The council currently follows the New Zealand Australian standard on road naming protocols, and yes, that we have updated those protocols again as part of this review to what the current protocols are. So yes, those sorts of things are still in there.
Oh, we still have the problem then. We can't change our policy to overcome the issues or the extended time we spent last time trying to come to an arrangement on the new street name.
Staff did not raise that as an issue that is happening with any frequency. So it might be that there are very occasionally those sorts of situations arising, but it's not a regular problem.
Okay, and the second and last question, Sandra, in the last term, there was council time spent on the possibility of changing street names in Hamilton that were offensive to some of our residents. Is that part of this, or is that a separate ongoing matter that still needs to be reported back to council?
Yes, there is another report which will be coming to councillors, which is dealing with that particular issue, and the policy will alleviate some of those problems, we think, but there's at a later date that particular issue will be coming to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sandra. I just have a very brief question. I was just interested, the open places, the policy around that, it looks like that's not really changing fundamentally at all in any ways. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. So is the process for that basically staff will consult with Thorpe, come up with a recommendation, it comes to council and we vote on it? Is that always the way that it is approached?
We're not proposing any changes to that. So just, yeah.
But just confirming that's the way that's the current process, is it?
For open places, yes. There's a lot of legislation to be taken into account with the open spaces namings. And so it's just a little bit trickier to get a name.
Yeah, right. Okay. No, that's all good. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff.
Thanks, Paula, and apologies, I missed the very start of the presentation. I had a phone call. Can I just check, we've consulted with Thorpe on this. We're going to ask Waikato Tainui what they think. What are the developers saying? Have we talked to them, and what's their feedback about it?
So our plan is that when we go for public consultation, we will make sure that we make them aware of it and give them targeted consultation so that they understand the issues around it. Our initial thoughts are that this addresses some concerns that developers have raised with staff in the past about the time pressure that is on this process currently. And given that the iwi consultation happens so late in the consenting process.
So I guess what I'm saying is why haven't we talked to developers about this already? I mean, surely we owe it to them to have them as part of the conversation, not just do this and then go out for public consultation. I mean, there's different parties in this arrangement, so we should know their feedback now.
Yes. COVID-19 came along and did sort of interfere with our plans to try to communicate directly with a few developers, and so it's kind of.
Well, what about the property council? I mean, it just seems convenient that we've managed to consult with Thorpe and we're consulting with Waikato Tainui, but we haven't managed to consult with the property council or developers.
Okay, so we can
do that.
We're talking to them now, not making some sort of decision and then going out for consultation.
Well, we're not making a decision yet, and that is a valid piece.
What I'm saying is that their views should be presented here today.
Their views will be presented before it goes out. So
that's correct. We'll make sure they are, Deputy Mayor.
I am hearing you. I just don't want to dwell on that space.
What I'm saying is the process to me is not quite right, because I'm getting a one-sided presentation here. I'm not getting the other other party's views.
I agree, but we're looking at it for the first time. So yes, we'll have plenty of time to do that. And I agree that there could have been some indicative feedback from parties. Okay, moving on, I've got Dave.
Thanks, Paula. Sort of similar question to Jeff's, but coming from a quite different angle. I want to know what about the public consultation part, whether that also only happens at the end and that they just get given a very short list names rather than having some consultation. One of the things that I've seen happening in the recent past is that names that developers come up with are not necessarily supported by the public, the long-term residents of an area that suddenly gets developed. I'm sort of approaching this from the fact that developers are Johnny come lately, and I support the extra consultation of Māori, but what about the rest of the community, the farmers who've lived in the area, the people who've got houses on the street already? Briarwood Rise, which used to be Sylvester Road, was a case where there was a lot of dickering, and there wasn't sort of a requirement that the residents on that road be fully consulted. So I'm just wondering at what stage the public have a chance of getting in, or is it sort of after 3/4 is done?
So, Dave, just to be clear, I thought you were talking about when a name is proposed, or are you talking about the policy? Because I think Jeff was talking about there hadn't been adequate pre-consultation in the development of the policy, weren't you, Jeff?
Well, not so much the policy, more the name, when the name is proposed, but the policy sets out at what stage.
Okay, cool.
Communities control.
Thank you, that's clearer. Okay, so we response to that, Sandra?
Yes, the way the policy is at the moment, there is no obligation on the developer to do broader public consultation on the selection of road names. If councillors want that in the policy, then I'm happy to take guidance, although we certainly would need to investigate there on what the implications or financial issues or timing issues are for developers. That might be consulting with wider public can be quite a significant thing to go into. So we haven't done any work around that area.
Okay.
Paula, how do we advance that if we want to? Can we do that in the briefing coming up, or whatever we're doing next about this?
So what I'll do is I'll take questions and then I'll go round everyone like I did before, and you can ask for the information that you need for the next step, which includes Jeff's request for additional input before we go out on the public with this. Okay, so I have Te Pora. Are you there?
Thank you, Mayor Paula. A couple from me. On page 2, there's the criteria between A to G. Is that's all? It doesn't specify whether it's all of the criteria needs to be met, or if it's an and or situation. And on that, there's some stuff in there around must be easy to spell and pronounce. I need to ask, well, what if we have a Māori name in there, what was considered easy to pronounce or spell, and for who? So it'd be good to have a bit of a review of the criteria. Can I just clarify? I think I heard before that, Sandra, you said that the recommendation is put forward by the General Manager. Is that right?
So
for the final road name.
In some circumstances, the General Manager is the person who is the decision maker, and in other circumstances, that decision comes up to council.
Okay. So in that, I would hope that perhaps we could explore, even through the consultation or engagement, around some sort of equity in decision making, and how we can have a more rounded decision making process, and that recommendations being put forward by all those concerned in there.
Sorry, can I just clarify your? I just didn't quite understand equity in decision making. Are you proposing there that who else would be involved? So at the moment, it's either the GM or councillors themselves, and I'm just not understanding what you're envisaging for a more equitable decision making process. Who else would be involved in that? Just for example.
So at the moment, we're just getting questions for clarity. But Te Pora, if you want to raise a point about that when we have the wrap-up comments, that would be useful.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make a note for that one. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then the clarity around it. So it's half the names that are put forward are in Te Reo Māori.
I know
And
the 50% criteria is that in the decisions that are made, council is aiming for 50% of names across the city to be in Te Reo Māori.
Okay, so again, actually, no, I'll save that one to the end. No, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Ewan.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Paula. Look, mine zeroes in somewhat on the fact that we've combined both the process for new roads and for potentially renaming existing roads. And they, I just look at page 17.5 and the general procedure. And I guess I'm concerned that we're going to open ourselves up to ongoing litigation of historical names that are already in place. And there's nothing in the policy that requires a broader discussion or consultation of those people that will be affected, and in fact, any understanding of the cost. And I'm just trying to work in why in the policy we don't, for example, if you suddenly decide to rename Victoria Street, and all the consequences of costs to those who have established businesses. So that's the first question. The second question is, does this policy, you mentioned that you had heard back from developers, and one of the pushback areas is over issue of timing and how long and drag this process out. And our response to that is to have added a 12-week process to give iwi time to feed back. How do you resolve those two? We seem to be making it even more complicated and dragged out. Maybe I've misread that. Maybe, Sandra, you can explain it in small words, remember?
Sure. I'll do those two questions backwards. How's that? So with the first one, the concerns that we had heard from developers about timing was when they consulted, okay, which was that they weren't consulting iwi until after the roads had been decided, the exact location of the roads had been decided in the consenting process. That's basically at the point where they get the big tick that their consent has been approved and they can start turning over the dirt, okay? So at that point in time, having to consult with iwi then was a very busy time for them and difficult. So we are now moving this all the way back, well before they lodge their consent. Okay, so, and they've got time then, that there's time for that consultation to occur, and there's no pressure on the developer.
And that's when the 12 weeks starts.
And that's when the 12 weeks starts.
Not at the end phase. Okay.
That's right. So that's why we
glean that.
Yeah, so that's why we were trying to make it easier for both parties and take the pressure off, which was occurring. So yeah, and going back again, your question about those understanding the cost to to businesses and wider involvement of the public. So we haven't changed.
For changing historical names. I guess a second limb to my question is, why don't we have two policies? Why have you merged the two together? Because one is straightforward, this is what we're doing moving forward for all new roads. The other is a lot more controversial and a lot more sensitive. And you've merged and blurred the two together.
Actually, if I can just clarify that, we've actually made this policy much easier to read. If you go back and look at the original policy, we haven't actually changed any of those aspects. They are all the same as the original policy. We haven't merged anything. What we have done is spent quite a bit of time moving things around to try and make it clearer, because there's two confusing issues. There's naming and renaming, and there's public and private roads. And those things all change. If you separated them out, you'd get lots of repetition, because for public roads, whether you're naming or renaming, you've got this. For private roads, it's that, and so that's why we put in the flow diagram at the end as well, to try and help guide people through the complications of those different elements. So yeah, it was actually, the original policy was quite a bit worse, I have to say, but I still understand your point that there isn't those aspects like a consideration of what the cost is to business, and those weren't in the original policy. But if you would like to give us direction that those need to be in the policy, then we can have a look at those things. We haven't changed any of those. We just moved them around into different places.
Mayor Paul, if you...
I'm getting you, Ewan, because what I think, and maybe Richard, do you want to make a comment? What I think you're talking about is we have another body of work underway too around some historic renaming, which, as Ewan points out, is a bigger piece of work, likely to draw much more public attention on both sides of the argument. So how do those two pieces of work come together in a meaningful way? We've got the policy framework, but we're still doing this other approach with the cultural sensitivity report, etc. So I need to understand how that works.
Yeah. So I think, oh, sorry, Sandra, go for it. You answer, because you probably answer right. Go.
I don't know, Richard, you might know more than me. And my understanding is that the work done on the cultural sensitivity and the issues around renaming is still underway, but that the policy changes that we are making may address some of the concerns that have been raised. And that work is still continuing, but the policy work is sort of more overarching and sort of above that. So those things will take these policy changes and it will feed into that report.
So, Councillor Wilson and Mayor Paula, I hear your concerns. I think what we'll do is post this briefing on take those concerns and see whether or not there are other alternatives in terms of bring these all into a head and making sure we don't necessarily have to follow what we did previously, Sandra, which you're well aware of. We can change things around. We also don't like having too many policies as well. So in previous years, we've gone out of our way to consolidate as many of our policies as we can to reduce the number of them as well. So trying to get the happy balance, but I'm more than comfortable to sit down and actually look at what the best way of optimising these are. So I'll take that on board to do so.
Final question, Paula. In this policy, by signing off this new policy that we've got in front of us, and we're not doing that today, I acknowledge, are we committing ourselves to go back to all existing named roads, and in theory, 50% of them should be Te Reo and 50% should be English? Do you see my point? Because the way you've worded the document, this policy is an enabling piece of policy, and you've merged the two together. So if I was inclined, I'd read the policy and go, well, actually, am I entitled to ask for 50% of the current named roads to be renamed in Te Reo?
Okay, I think that's a nuance that we can have a look at, because I get your point there. So this is in fact, I'm coming to you, Norm. I'm just following all the little blue hands as well.
I'm sorry, can we get an answer to that? I'd be really interested to get an answer to that.
Well, what's the answer? It's a technical thing, because at the moment the
answer is yes.
There's some ambiguity in that particular expression of the policy. So what more do you want to do? Have you got another response to that, Sandra or Grant?
I would say that the way it's worded now is that there is an intent that Hamilton will move to a 50% Te Reo, and that, of course, following the policy, anyone can put forward a request for renaming at any time, but we would not anticipate a large number of people requesting a renaming of a road under the revised policy if it went forward.
Okay, so I think the point that you can talk to it in your when we have our roundup, Ewan, but any ambiguity can go terribly wrong. So we just need to make sure that we say what we mean. Okay, I have a number of people I'm going to Mark, and then I'm going to Norm, and I can see some more hands up as well.
Cool. Thank you, Mayor Paula, and thanks Ewan for nailing that. I kind of wish you were here last term when we were talking about Dame Hilda Ross Way about who pays. Is there anywhere in this policy that addresses who pays for any costs of name change? Because in streets like Ward 2, Dame Hilda Ross, we were just told, no, it's up to them, that's the way it goes. Is there anything in there that gives any mind to that, Sandra?
Yes, clause 20 states the costs associated with a name change must be met in full by the applicants, except where the name change is initiated by council resolution.
And is that new, is it?
No, that's the same. It was there before.
That doesn't include things like a whole lot of businesses changing their domain name, their stationery, that kind of thing. That's what you get. I knew that's what you're. So in terms of costs further down the chain, so you change your name, and everyone has to change their web addresses to be consistent or whatever it might, business cards, etc.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to comment on that or just hold it?
No, but I'll be keen to hear if that. So that's all there is. So let me understand that clearly. If the applicant decides to change a name, they must meet all the associated costs. Now, what's the threshold of that? Is that the new signs or anything, or is it the business cards, the letterhead, everything else?
It's the council costs.
The council costs. So it's really all right.
Yeah. So not if you've got a street with lots of businesses, the applicant would not be expected to meet their costs of changing business cards and signs and web pages. However, all of those people who are affected would be consulted and according to the process within the policy. And it needs to be, I think it's 80, or it's either 80 or 90% of them need to agree to the road change, name change before it goes ahead. Now, let me just pull it up. There's where is it? 90% of the property owners on the road agree to the change.
So that's our policy at the moment.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, cool. All right. So hey, this 50% today, when was it why was it decided that this should be the case? Where was that number come from? Where did that number come from?
So in our first early discussions with iwi, they suggested a 50% change, 50% inter-AO. When we went and discussed this with the relevant staff members who are involved in this, they said, oh, we kind of roughly do that already. They said there's no, that they weren't following any policy or anything. It was just generally that's the way things fell out, basically, with the way the process was currently running. So without them really trying, it just kind of was working that way. Yeah. And so we were sort of like, okay, so internally, this didn't seem to be that it was going to be some major change for council. It was sort of organically just occurring.
So why lock it in? And I'm certainly not trying to be political. I'm just curious.
Well, I suppose it was that iwi had suggested it and asked for it to be involved. And to be more specific in there, and so we thought, well, let's put it to councillors and see what they think.
Okay.
So thank you. Someone asked earlier on about, I think it might have been Ewan was talking about 50% Te Reo, 50% English, but is it actually 50% Te Reo, 50% something else? I'm thinking of Green Hill Park, for example.
It would be 50% something else.
Okay. On page 17, the criteria for road names. That's our existing one, 0.8, is that right, with the A to J?
Yes.
So the non-duplication, like we can't have the same name that they have in Waipara, Waikato. They've got to be less than 12. They've got to be single words. Are you aware how many streets we've got that already breach those first three at least?
Yes, it's because obviously some roads were named a long time ago before we had this criteria. A lot of these criteria have been asked for by emergency services, for example, to make it easier for them to send the ambulance to the correct address, and that sort of thing.
I understand.
Okay, I need to move on, Mark, and let's
yeah, no, look,
last one.
Yeah, no, look, pretty much everyone else has gone where I want to go, so thank you.
Thank you. Norm.
Yep, kia ora, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tēnei te mi kia koe Grant, te rangatira mai raikawa, nei te mi. Kia ora tātou. I just want to share some thoughts, and then I've got my questions.
Well, questions at this time. Norm, if you don't mind, questions now and thoughts when we do our wrap up, if that's okay.
Okay. My questions is how do you think the Treaty of Waitangi has been reflected in regards to whakapapa of names pertaining to the policy? I've got, do you want to answer that one? That might be a Grant one. My other question is going to be pertaining to the RMA in regards to good principles of early engagement, enhancing te ture whai mana in terms of Indigenous recognition. And my other question is in regards to the JMA. So Treaty of Waitangi, Joint Management Agreement, and RMA.
Okay, thank you.
Where the connections to those three relevant high-level legal policies are, Grant.
Would it be okay if I just jumped into that? So what we're asking for is just input for direction for this. So Norm, would you like us to consider greater consideration of those things within this policy?
No, hang on a minute. We're not. When we do the wrap up, Jen, everyone will talk to what they feel the policy should include. At the moment, it's just questions for clarification and understanding.
I think through you, me, Paula, kia ora, Norm. Just in terms of answering those 3 points, I think the way I'd answer that is, I think what this policy and the direction that sort of Sandra is taking us and the concept is trying to get better alignment, particularly in regards to the joint management agreement or the spirit of that document, and also, of course, in terms of alignment to the treaty and to the settlement of Waikato Tainui's settlement documentation as well. So I think what we're really trying to say here is that we've heard the feedback from Thorpe. We understand potentially where Waikato Tainui might be on this, and we're trying to provide for that through this particular process. We believe that it gives better recognition and breathes a bit more life into those documents through this particular policy.
So the question is that you might know what Waikato Tainui is talking about, or you do know what their position is on it?
No, we don't. So we don't currently know. What I'm expressing is through the feedback through Thorpe. We get a general. What we're trying to say here is that I think where this policy is probably going some way, in my read of it, in terms of trying to breathe better life into the principles of the joint management agreement and the treaty.
Okay, you can talk to that in your comments at the end, Norm. Any other question?
I'll wait till the end. Kia ora, thank you.
All right, thank you. I've got Maxine and then Martin.
Thank you. Thanks, Sandra, for all of that work and for capturing those ideas. Earlier this week, we met with the Property Council, and so largely the question I had around the timing has been answered by you in terms of the process where they will, where developers could consult with iwi. And they talked about a 2 to 10 year time frame and being able to get new developments, including roading, up and completed. So it seems that 12 weeks would fit easily into there. What part do you think council can play in brokering those relationships and maybe introductions between the parties?
Yes, the policy specifies that developers will contact council for advice on who the appropriate people are to talk to within iwi, and to put the two parties together to facilitate that happening.
And also, just Paula, the other point to that is that talking internally, the other opportunity that exists in this is that when we're doing pre-application meetings with developers, that this would be the sort of things that we'd be raising with them very early on in a process, so they're aware of the process they need to follow and the requirements to engage.
Okay, that answers your question. Thanks, Max. I have Martin and then Ewan.
Yeah, sorry, just remind me again, I apologise for a bit vague. when we talk about a 50% of named or renamed public roads, is that moving forward, or is that an aspiration to be retrospective as well?
It is,
I know this was raised before. I just want to clarify again.
That is future, into the future. So over time, we have an intent that we will move towards 50% to rail across the city.
Sure.
I think the point that Martin might be making is along the same lines as Ewan about the renaming of streets. Is that where you're heading with this, Martin, looking back at streets already named?
Yeah. So in the staff report, moving forward, you may have already done this. It would be, obviously, I'd be seeking some clarification about the history because, for example, if you take Frankton.
So just sorry, but the question at the moment, and in a minute, you'll have a chance to say exactly that.
If I could just add there, Mayor, just to clarify, if we reworded that particular sentence about the intent to refer to 4 applications received, then that would perhaps indicate more clearly that we're not embarking on a retrospective analysis of all names, but we are, as applications come to us, those applications will be considered on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, look, I'll cover the retrospective bit in history when we do the wrap-up. The other question is there any thought, and if you've already dealt with this, to have what I call the helicopter view, that you have the total map of Hamilton at the moment, Hamilton, Kirikiriroa, and that where we think there's going to be future development, we start the consultation now. And apologies if I wasn't paying attention to earlier questions, because it seems to me even before a development's being mooted, surely why are we not, if we're not already having that dialogue right now in terms of the historical names and connections in terms of Te Reo? Sandra?
I think that is something that would fall under that other report that's being done rather than the policy review, although I'm a bit unclear. Maybe Grant could clarify. Is he? Where'd he go?
He's there. Just unmuting.
Yeah, just unmuting, sorry. In terms of that particular question, I think where opportunity exists for us to engage in a process and speak with people about the wider or things that might be coming at us in terms of greenfield development, we certainly should take that opportunity. But in terms of this particular policy, it is really much driven by applicants and developers as they go through the subdivision land use proposal.
Well, that's equivalent, applicants and developers. So I'll perhaps come back into the commentary, because logically, even if something's 20 years away, why would we not be filling in history now, so that when a developer comes along in 15 years, they have an immediate reference as to the likely kind of adjustment.
Okay, so yeah,
right?
Good points for your comments. Okay, there's no more questions, which is good, because we'll now go around everybody, and we will then we'll have a nice break for lunch before we get into another meaty topic this afternoon. So I'm going to go Councillor Pascoe. You're mute. Nothing? Okay. Councillor Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. Yeah, my main point is about the lack of pre-consultation, in my view. Well, not in my view, but there's a lack of pre-consultation. It kind of, look, I hate to say this, but it sort of feels like a policy sort of cooked up between staff and iwi, and without talking to the other main partner involved, the development community, who are affected by it. And countless times we have conversations with the property council whose main complaint is that they don't get brought into process early. They get surprised by things, and here we are doing it again. So I really, before it even got here, we should have known what all parties were saying on it. I think the timing of 12 weeks, it seems problematic to me. I think we've got issues there. I don't have any issues with 50-50 naming going forward, in my view, but I certainly, any suggestion of retrospective name 50-50 naming is not a place I'd be going. So that's where I'm at the moment. I'm disappointed that we haven't done more pre-consultation before it got to this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, if she's there. I can't see if she is.
She just left to go to a webinar, Your Worship.
Thank you very much.
Mayor Paula.
Mayor Paula's better, thanks. Cash is here? Yes, Cash is there.
No, nothing to add at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I do have some stuff to add. I'm sorry, Jeff, my internet froze while you were speaking. So if I repeat what Jeff said, or yeah, I think there's a lot of work to do on this yet, Sandra. Thank you for your work so far, though. You know, I rate you highly in the work you do. But I would like to see a lot more significance given to, and if this is going to be a merge up between name changing and name originating, I would like to see a lot more significance given to the recompense to people who have to change their own business because of this. So they need more significance in the picture as far as I can see. I think there are too many assumptions in this at this stage for us to make any firm judgment on it as well. We're assuming what Tainui may or may not say. And as we've seen with a couple of things recently, sometimes they can throw a curveball at you, and it's worth waiting for that because it is important. We're also making some assumptions here that this report may alleviate the findings of that other significant name-changing report we've got coming out yet, and it's a little bit vague for me at this point. And I'm pleased to see Rich is going to take it away and try and bring those together to us, but I just don't think we can make any decision on this yet. I'd be really interested, Norm, to share a beer with you and talk about how this does give significance to tiriti. Because as far as I can see, if we are activating the treaty doesn't say it's a 50-50 split. We are co-governing and co-sharing. This is my interpretation of it. So I would have thought perhaps double naming these streets would be more in keeping with tiriti. But I think that's probably a discussion that you and I need to have respectfully over a beer some stage shortly. Your shout. And I will just say, ignore recent history at your peril. There are some, and I think this makes it really hard. I was trying to find out if something heroic had been done in the last 100 years at an area. It seems a very hard, you're up against it if you want to get a street named.
Okay, so just stick to what you need for the next set of information rather, because this isn't decision making.
So getting to that point,
Thank you.
Slowly, it goes back to what Jeff, I think, was saying about the consultation. I would like to see a lot more public consultation, more than just iwi and Thorpe, more than just the developers, but people who have some stake in that land or in the history of that particular space. So I'd like to see more significance given to them as well. So hopefully that's given you, if you've extracted some points out of that.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Van Oosten.
She's gone.
Has she gone? Oh, okay. I think we've got, it would be hard for you since you haven't heard the whole presentation, but Ollie, you are with us. All we're doing is raising questions for the next time we look at this, making some generalised statements about what you'd like to see in it. If you want to participate in that, you're welcome. If you prefer to not at this time, that's fine too.
I'll just hold off at this stage. Thanks, Mayor Paul. Apologies for latest. Caught up with business.
That's fine, and I apologise that you were in the waiting room a bit longer than you should have been. I'm not controlling that, but I didn't notice, and I'll try and keep a better eye on the waiting room. Okay, who have I got next then? Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Paul. Look, Sandra, I think there's a good framework there. I think there are some hooks in there with the current wording, and I think some cleverly crafted words will help you. I'm very concerned about the ambiguity that could lead to a retrospective look on the existing roads, and that is talking about opening a can of worms, and I think that would be a backward step. And so I guess I reiterate my desire to have the type of better communication, more equity among the two languages going forward. But I don't want this to be seen as a policy that leverages everybody's opportunity to try to rewrite history. And so, I mean, that's a strong view, but it's my view.
Okay, so if you can just focus on what we need to do to move your information levels forward next time would be good.
Yeah, so thank you. So I would be asking for clarity about wording that would give me comfort that the thrust of this policy is forward-looking rather than an open gate to relitigate already named streets.
Okay, that's good.
And even going forward, that there is some thinking about how we manage the costs that would occur to any street. No. Actually, I've realised if we sort the first part out, then maybe the second part isn't so important. But I guess what I'm trying to say is if there is a renaming of a street that already existed, part of the calculation has to include in the thinking the cost to those who are currently there, whether it's businesses with website portals, physical business cards, etc. That's it.
Thank you. Some good points in there, I think. So let me see who's next. Sorry, Mangai Hill, Norm.
A name isn't just a name. It's about mātauranga Māori. It's about whakapapa. It's about history. It's about identity. And when we take into account the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, the Joint Management Agreement, the RMA, Te Ture Whaimana, the Vision and Strategy of the River, how we execute that and provide the tangible outcomes are things like this policy. I personally think 50% is actually a baseline. My target would be 75 to 100% Te Reo Māori. It'd be really good to reaffirm where the tribe's position on this in regards to the Joint Management Agreement and all those other key components I've talked about. And I think this opportunity reaffirms a number of points that I've raised in some meetings from an environmental perspective is around Indigenous placemaking principles and values that provide a korowai across all of Kirikiriroa, not just in terms of roads, but reserves, new areas. And so in regards to developers have been real focused towards best practice early engagement. And in regards to Jeff's comments around this being cooked up by staff in iwi, a lot of developers and best
okay, so we won't debate. Sorry, Norm. Just I'm going to not allow a debate against other people's positions. This is the chance for you to express what you need to see the policy develop into, because we will get into a full debate and discussion. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. So getting fulsome inclusion from Waikato Tāngata as part of the process is where I landed with that, Mayor Paula.
Yeah. Thank you.
And Mayor Bunting, I don't drink.
And yeah, look, I'm not trying to cut off the discussion. I just want to focus. The intent of this is to focus our next set of information to come back to council to guide staff. We will, of course, have a full and transparent and public debate when the time is right, as we absolutely should. Okay, I'm now, sorry, look at my list. Thank you. I'm on Councillor Forsyth. Is Margaret there? Oh, yes.
No, sorry, I haven't put my hand down. I don't need to speak. Thanks.
Okay, I'm just going down the list for the feedback. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. Look, I think there's been some good comments made on all fronts. So I think, yeah, well done, Sandra. It's a good starting point. I just think there's a few areas that need to be fleshed out further. But I look forward to the further discussion coming up. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got Tapora, if you're still there.
I am still here, Mayor Paula, thank you. So I have to agree that there is some sort of ambiguity around the 50% of street names would be in Te Reo Māori, and I would hold some caution about that, because it does set a, well, for me anyway, it says, okay, well, let's set a goal to get to this 50% and let's get that sort of done now. It is enabling in there where it should be. I would view that we should aim, just as Norm has, above the 50%. 50% is the baseline in there. I too would like some a deeper dive into Tiriti o Waitangi, the RMA, the Ture Whai Manawa framework. Heard some discussion about the financial cost to this, but as we have the well-beings, you also need to consider the cultural and social costs to this, for which many, such as mana whenua, iwi, that cost has been very, very high. So if we could have a dive into that when this comes back around again. I think what it gives an indication as well, just this policy on its own, is that perhaps we may need to look at not dealing with Māori issues, and I know the renaming is not wholly a Māori issue, but there are some aspects of it that we need to consider mana whenua, iwi, Māori views, and I think it's a good time to consider within this report a Māori plan, so that it's not bit piece coming in all over the show, but there is some guidance around how we might go about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Martin, Councillor Gallagher. Martin.
Yeah, thank you. I really want to get a sense, a better sense. So, for example, if we take the Frankton area in terms of street names, that was named after people who were settlers in terms of coming here and were associated with the evolution and development of Frankton. If I go to another suburb where I think there's a whole lot of Portuguese names, Vasco da Gama, Magellan Heights, you name it, or Sherwood Forest, I don't think those streets related to the settlement or the inhabitants of the area. I think it was just picked up, or there's another series of streets named after carpets, or carpets for some reason. So I want to get a sense of the street names that are associated with local regional history, and that is a totally different thing. And I think because that's just moving forward, I'm not saying that you're going to change all these other carpet street names, Sherwood Forest street names at all, that's done. Obviously, proper consultation is important, and in the debate, let's reflect on the name Chartwell. I think there was a special delegation went to the Churchill family to seek permission for the word Chartwell to be used in Hamilton from the Churchill's Chartwell estate. I'm not sure, historically, I'm sure there was very comprehensive consultation with Tainui on that particular move at the time. I'd like to find out exactly what consultation there was. Frankly, if I was, so I think this is all about New Zealand Aotearoa reconnecting with its total history and also local history as well. And okay. It would be, let me finish. If we look at other societies, predominantly English-speaking, like Ireland, Britain, many of their place names have the historical context.
So can you reflect your comments towards what you would like to see in the next set of information?
What I actually want to see is a bit of historical reflection. And I want to see a historical reflection that just in living memory, some of us remember a centenary in 1965 or 64 when there was a year zero approach to history. Read the Waikato Times, zero reflection of Tainui, and I think this is about a historical...
Okay, and this is all good stuff, Martin, but at the moment, I want to focus on the policy.
It's good stuff, and it's just what I was saying. Forgive my degree of reflective anger on that. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done, because how you obliterate a people is through naming.
We're going off topic here, please.
Well,
please
okay. Well,
stop.
I think it's very on topic because we've got to see a historical context, actually, if you respect it. What I want to do is I want a report which reflects on the street naming and place naming to date that's reflected in local history, right? Because I think that's very different. And moving forward, I asked for a helicopter view. So I don't want in 15 years a future council led by the next generation of leaders to have to go chat to a developer retroactively. I think we need to have a sort of a broad reflection of the historical names and associations now, so that when we get to a future grid map of streets or parks or reserves, we've got that as a background.
Okay.
Also, just final point, and this is not in any way to embarrass him or his family, the late Philip Young. I do want a list that we as a council start naming of some amazing people who might have made a contribution over the years from all backgrounds of our country in terms of ethnic origin, name, etc., that we may want to use in future for a street name or a reserve or a park name. So you see what I mean? If we're looking at the total thing, I'm wanting to have some sort of innovative, good roundtable, obviously involving Tainui, a good roundtable forward chat, so that moving forward we have a bit of a vision. And I do agree with you, and I think around the renaming bit, and I know there's going to be some issues coming up with regard to Von Tempsky, Bryce, Grey Street. Obviously, that, in my view, should be a more nuanced discussion, which may in the first instance even involve a much greater public awareness through plaques of the actual history.
Okay, we need to
those particular names.
Need to rein this into the topic. Thank you. Look, we've just got Dave and myself, and you know, this is to inform staff. Oh, have I not meant? Okay, and Margaret. So Dave, Margaret, then me.
Thank you, Paula. Martin gave some great questions there. I think they were questions anyway, but I used to live in the middle of a set of streets named after ancient English poets. Of course, had a close connection with Kirikiriroa, but I'm sitting in front of a huia bird, which is actually a place name for a new train. I'm just making a point there as well. Ewan mentioned that he was concerned about opening a can of worms. I'm actually all in favour of some of those cans of worms being opened, so I don't think there should be any sacred cows. And in fact, worms are regarded nowadays as very
okay. Get to what you want. Get to what you want in the policy.
So I don't want any restrictions on what comes forward, both in terms of policy and proposals for names. I think you have to be careful about who you consult with, how you consult with them, but in terms of what you're consulting about, it should be broad, and I don't think we should necessarily pick an arbitrary 50%. I think going to Norm's point earlier, I think we should look at horses for courses where it's appropriate, when there are opportunities, both for renaming and for new names. I definitely don't think that developers should be given. I wouldn't want to see a policy come forward proposed to us that said developers had some right greater than the residents who are going to live in the area, or the residents who already live in the area before the area was developed. And some of them go back several hundred years, I might point out. So developers are definitely they're going to make their money regardless of names. So please don't try me with that argument. Thank you.
Okay, we're falling into very political talk instead of focusing on giving staff feedback. But we're on the second to last, so Margaret.
I'll try and not get political, but just following up from Martin's points around historical context with place naming, I'd like there to be some breadth around cultural context and historic context as well. So I'm mindful that it's not just been a Māori and European contribution to the growth of Hamilton, or to Hamilton as a place to live. I know that we have other ethnic groups that have really contributed a lot. So I would really like to see how inclusive and how more consultative we can be with those groups of cultural groups. And secondly, let's not forget the contribution that women have made historically and culturally as well. And I'm hoping that when we look to name streets after those that have great men, etc., that have stood before us, that there's a real lens on women's contributions too, like the Dame Hilda Rosses of Hamilton. But there are a whole lot more women that have been have less public profiles than Dame Hilda, and I really hope that we acknowledge them as well.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, councillors. We've actually, we're running over time, but that's fine. A lot of really key issues were made. I hope the staff have found it very useful to get that early input. Now, remember that that's exactly what it was. It was the first look at where we were heading, and by no means definitive, and no means the end of the conversation with anyone about this. So thank you for raising a broad set of really important considerations, including, as Deputy Mayor Taylor has said, considerations around consultation, as also Norm said. There are other aspects to consultation that need to be more broadly considered before we start ticking off this policy in any way. And quite clearly, it was noted by many councillors in their questions that we need to understand better the connection between the piece of work around renaming streets, in particular, how that fits in with the cultural sensitivity report that we're yet to fully digest and consider, because these things don't operate in isolation. So that's all I would say, but I would say thank you to councillors for a really robust debate, and you'll be pleased to know that you get a decent stretch of lunch break today, which, believe me, when you've sat still like this for some while, is absolutely necessary. So I'll see you all back at 2 for some more robust debate, robust presentations. All right, see you 2.
See ya.
Hey, Norm. Oh, went.